Dad's silent revenge.
The moment I heard that deadbolt slide home from the other side of the cellar door, I didn't move, I didn't yell. I just stood still in the dark and listened to Philip's footsteps cross the kitchen floor above us, slow, deliberate, like a man who just finished a job. I'm Howard Greer. I'm 67 years old. I built this house with my own hands, and my son-in-law just locked my wife and me in our own wine cellar. Miriam reached for my arm in the dark. Her fingers were cold. They'd been cold for months since the stroke. I know that grip. After 35 years of marriage, you learn what every grip means. This one was asking a question without using words. I leaned close. Don't make a sound. They think they've won. They haven't. She didn't ask what I meant. She just loosened her fingers a little, took one slow breath and trusted me. That trust is the only thing in this house worth more than the house itself. You need to understand the house because the house is the whole story. I built it in 1989. Not hired someone, I built it. Poured the foundation on a cold April morning when the ground was still half frozen, framed the walls, ran every wire, laid the stone on the exterior facade one piece at a time. I was 32 years old. I had just retired early from a career as a structural engineer for the state of Connecticut, and I had a pension that felt enormous to a man who grew up sharing one bedroom with two brothers. Miriam was 28 and pregnant with our daughter Naomi. We had made a deal before the baby came. This child was going to have a real home, owned outright, no landlord, no bank breathing down our necks, no one who could show up one day and tell us we had to leave. It took 14 months. Miriam painted every room while I was still framing walls. We moved in 6 weeks before Naomi was born. The property sat on 2.5 acres in western Connecticut, 4 bedrooms, a sunroom on the south side that caught the afternoon light in a way that still stops me some mornings, and below the kitchen, the basement. Half storage, half what I called the wine cellar, though in the early years it held more old tax returns than bottles. Over time it became what the name said. Miriam developed a taste for Burgundy in her 40s, and I built out the space properly. Climate-controlled rack, reclaimed oak shelving, the whole thing. The room had a heavy solid core door with an exterior bolt. Miriam's idea for temperature control. I installed it myself, same as everything else in this house. I never once imagined that bolt would be used against us. By 2001, the mortgage was gone, paid off and free and clear. No bank, no lien, mine. By 2023, the county assessor valued the whole property at $1.4 million. Hold on to that number. Naomi married Philip Strand 9 years ago. He was a commercial real estate developer out of Fairfield County. Nice watch, firm handshake. The kind of man who used the word opportunity so often you started hearing it in your sleep. He said it 3 times at our first Thanksgiving dinner and didn't notice when conversation moved on without him. I didn't dislike him immediately. That took about 4 months. He had a way of moving through a room like he was taking inventory. First time I showed him the wine cellar, his eyes went to the square footage before the bottles. He measured things with his eyes the way some men do when they're thinking about what something is worth and who currently holds it. Naomi was different before him. Or maybe she was always this way and I just loved her too much to see it clearly. Either way, by the time Philip started making calls about estate planning, she was already standing next to him when he made them. 8 months before everything fell apart, Miriam had a mild stroke. She recovered well. Her doctor used the word manageable, which in my experience is what doctors say when they want to be honest without being frightening. Her short-term memory stayed soft. She tired out by mid-afternoon. She got confused sometimes about paperwork, what she had signed, what she hadn't, what day something had happened. She was not the woman she'd been at 55, and Philip had noticed that. I watched him noticing. He called me on a Tuesday evening in October, said he wanted to talk about protecting our assets, had a tax attorney who'd helped several clients transfer property to their children in a way that avoided estate taxes, said the timing was important given Miriam's health situation. That last part told me everything I needed to know. I told him I already had an attorney, a woman named Lorraine Holt, who had handled my estate documents for 20 years. He said Lorraine was a generalist and this required a specialist. I said I'd think about it. I thought about it for maybe 2 minutes, then I called Lorraine and told her word for word what Philip had said. She went quiet for a moment, then, "Howard, don't sign anything without calling me first. Not a power of attorney, not a deed transfer, not a gift letter. Nothing." I told her I understood. Then I sat at the kitchen table, the one I built myself from a slab of black walnut I milled in the backyard, and I thought hard about what kind of man makes that phone call, what he actually wants, and how far he'll go when he doesn't get it. That night I started getting ready. Over the next 18 months I did 3 things, and I didn't tell Miriam about any of them. First, I worked with Lorraine to restructure my estate into an irrevocable trust. The house, the land, all 2.5 acres went into the trust. That meant no deed transfer, no power of attorney, no forged signature could move the property without triggering an automatic legal challenge. Didn't matter what Philip had drafted or who he had waiting with a notary stamp, the trust would hold. Lorraine wrote a plain English letter explaining exactly that, no legal jargon, just the facts laid out clean, and I made certified copies and kept them in a fireproof box. Second, I installed a small camera in the wine cellar, motion activated, mounted behind the second row of burgundy on the left side of the rack where the shadows ran deep. It fed to a cloud account on my phone. Took me about 40 minutes on a Saturday morning while Miriam was at her sister's. I told no one. Third, I reinforced the concealed cavity I had built into the back wall of the cellar back in 1991, an engineer's habit. A recessed space behind a section of stone veneer at the far end of the back wall, sealed with a fitted panel held by a single interior catch. I had put things in and out of it over the years. Nothing dramatic. By January of this year, the cavity held the fireproof document box with the trust paperwork and Lorraine's letter, and a prepaid cell phone in a waterproof sleeve, fully charged. I tested it twice in the months before, once with the lights on, once with my eyes closed. I kept all of this from Miriam because I didn't want her spending whatever good years we had left bracing for a disaster that might not come. She had enough to manage with the recovery, the medication schedule, the memory gaps, the fatigue that hit her every afternoon like a door closing. She didn't need to carry this too. If the day arrived, I wanted to hand her something real, not a plan described in the abstract, a box she could hold. Evidence she could read. The pressure built through that fall, the way these things always build, slowly, with patience, disguised as concern. Naomi called more. She showed up on weekends she had never bothered with before, bringing good wine and flowers for Miriam and the version of herself I remembered from before Philip. Warm, attentive, asking about the house, asking about how we were managing, asking whether we had thought any more about the future. It made something tighten in my chest that I didn't have a clean word for then and still don't now. Philip talked numbers every time he visited. He had a talent for making your own home sound like a problem you hadn't solved yet. Property taxes on a 2.5-acre parcel weren't getting smaller. The house was 35 years old and older homes needed attention. Heating a 4-bedroom structure on a fixed income wasn't something to take lightly. He said the family every time he meant himself, and after a while I stopped correcting it in my head because it didn't matter. I knew what he meant. There was one visit in November I keep coming back to. It was a Sunday cold enough that the ground had already gone hard, and Philip sat at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee he barely touched and talked for almost 45 minutes about what he called the burden of illiquid assets. Said that a house like mine, and he said it like that, a house like mine, not your house, was actually a liability dressed up as security. Said that at my age cash was protection and property was a weight. Said Miriam's situation made it irresponsible not to plan ahead while there was still time to do it cleanly. That word cleanly, I didn't forget it. After they left that Sunday, I went down to the cellar, and I stood there for a few minutes in the quiet. I looked at the door. I looked at the bolt on the outside. I looked at the camera behind the burgundy rack, and I thought about what Philip was really saying when he talked about doing things cleanly. He was telling me he had a plan. He was telling me he thought I was old and slowing down and that Miriam was the softer target. He was telling me in the careful language of a man who develops commercial real estate that he had already decided how this was going to go. He just didn't know I had decided first. Then came January. The coldest Saturday of the year, maybe 11 degrees, the birch trees out front stripped down to bone against a white sky. They arrived together just after noon, Naomi and Philip, with a manila folder and the kind of careful practiced concern you put on the way you put on a good coat. Serious faces, measured voices, the whole performance. We sat at the kitchen table. Philip opened the folder and laid out a deed transfer, full transfer of the property to Naomi, with a life estate clause that supposedly allowed Miriam and me to remain in the house until we both died. He walked through it with the smooth confidence of a man who had explained this before, using just enough legal language to make questions feel like a sign of ignorance. I read every page, slowly. I took my time the way I take my time with every document, every contract, every plan someone else drew up and wants me to sign. Philip's jaw tightened a little with each page I turned. He wasn't used to waiting. When I finished, I set the papers down flat on the black walnut table and looked at my daughter. And Naomi, I said, a life estate can be revoked by the deed holder under certain legal circumstances. Did you know that? She looked at Philip. He looked at the table. I'm not signing this. Philip said I was being irrational. Said I was letting stubbornness cost my family hundreds of thousands of dollars. Said Miriam's condition made it genuinely irresponsible to keep delaying. Naomi said I'd never trusted her. Said this was exactly the kind of thing that tore families apart. I said, calmly, that everyone should go home and sleep on it. That's when things moved fast. Philip stood up from the table, not angry. That's the thing I remember most. He wasn't raising his voice or making threats. He was composed the way a man is composed when he has already thought through every exit and doesn't see one you can use. He said he needed to check something in the wine cellar before they left. Said he'd noticed last time that the temperature display on the climate control unit was reading inconsistent, and he wanted to take a look before the cold weather made it worse. He said it the way you say something you've rehearsed casual on the surface, but with the timing of a man who had been waiting for the right moment to say it. I should have caught it. Looking back, the tell was in how quickly he said it after I refused to sign. No pause, no reset. He moved straight from the argument to the next phase like a contractor moving between line items on a bid sheet. That's what he was. Underneath all the smooth talk, a man who ran projects, who broke large objectives into sequential steps, who did not leave the site until the job was done. But I had been in that cellar 1,000 times. I had built the climate control rack myself, and the cold outside was real, and the temperature display had been giving slightly off readings since October. So I said, fine, let's take a look, and I got up and put on my coat. We went down together, all four of us. Me first, then Miriam, then Naomi, then Philip last through the door. The cellar was exactly as I'd left it. The overhead bulb threw its usual yellow light across the oak shelving, across the rows of Burgundy and the few bottles of Bordeaux Miriam had been collecting, across the stone veneer at the back wall where the hidden panel sat flush and invisible behind the rack. I moved toward the climate control unit mounted on the east wall about 10 feet in. Miriam followed me. Naomi stayed near the door. I noticed not walking in, just standing at the threshold. At the time, I thought she was cold. Later, I understood she knew what was about to happen and couldn't make herself walk further into the room. I heard Philip's footsteps stop behind me. Then I heard the door, not a slam, a pull, the solid core door swinging shut on its hinges with the soft, definitive sound of something heavy and well-fitted closing. And then before I could turn around, the bolt, that bolt Miriam had asked me to install 20 years ago to keep the temperature stable, sliding home from the kitchen side. One clean sound, then silence. Philip's voice came through the wood, level, unhurried, the voice of a man finishing a transaction. The deed transfer is on the kitchen table. Howard, I have a notary scheduled for Monday morning. You can come upstairs and cooperate, or the two of you can spend the weekend down here. Your choice. Either way, this gets done, then footsteps. Moving away from the door, across the kitchen floor, getting smaller, then nothing. Miriam grabbed my arm. The overhead bulb had been switched off from the panel upstairs. I hadn't heard him do it. Must have been Naomi at the top of the stairs, and now the only light in the cellar was the faint green glow of the climate control display on the east wall, reading 58 degrees in the dark. Her grip was fierce, not panicked fierce. The grip of a woman who is frightened and has decided not to let the fear make decisions for her. I said, Miriam, give me 4 minutes. I let go of her arm and crossed the cellar. I didn't need the light. I had built this room. I knew exactly how many steps to the back wall, knew the precise location of every rack, every post, every seam in the stone veneer. 14 steps to the back wall. I placed my hand flat against the lower left corner of the stone panel and pressed at the angle I had tested twice in the past year, once with the light on, once with my eyes closed. The catch released on the third try. The panel swung inward on its hinge. I reached into the cavity and found the fireproof document box. Under it, wrapped in a waterproof sleeve, the prepaid phone. I turned on the phone's flashlight first. Miriam made a sound I had not heard from her before, somewhere between relief and something I didn't have a name for. I held the light up so she could see the box. Then I opened it and handed her Lorraine's letter. She read it standing in the cold, her coat still on from coming downstairs, the flashlight beam steady in my hand. When she finished, she looked up at me. Her eyes were bright. They can't have the house, I said. The trust makes every transfer void, but I need to make 2 calls before anything else. Then I opened the camera app on my phone. The motion-activated camera behind the Burgundy rack had logged 3 events since we came downstairs. The third was from the past 10 minutes, Philip, in the cellar. During the 6 minutes, he spent down here alone 2 hours earlier under the pretext of dropping off the wine they had brought. The footage was clear, his face in frame, his voice audible as he moved through the space, measured the room with his eyes, and made a phone call confirming the Monday notary appointment. His exact words, "The old man won't sign, so we do it the other way, make sure the paperwork is ready by Sunday night." His voice, his face, his words, on a camera I installed, in a room I built, in a house that was never going to be his. I called Lorraine first. She picked up on the second ring. I had called her the evening before, Friday night, after Philip had confirmed their visit for Saturday, and told her tomorrow might be the day. Asked her to keep her phone close. She had said she would, and she had meant it, because that's the kind of attorney Lorraine Holt is. She doesn't just file your paperwork and bill you, she pays attention. She told me the emergency injunction paperwork was already drafted and sitting on her desk. She told me the notary Philip had scheduled for Monday morning would find a cease and desist waiting for him before he finished his first cup of coffee. She told me the irrevocable trust was airtight and that any deed transfer Philip presented, regardless of whose signature was on it, was legally void the moment it was filed. She told me to call 911. I called 911. I told the dispatcher as steadily as I could that my wife and I had been locked inside our own basement by our son-in-law, who was currently in our home attempting to fraudulently transfer our property, that my wife had a history of stroke and required her medication, that I needed both police and paramedics at our address in Western Connecticut. The dispatcher asked if we were safe. I looked at Miriam. She was sitting on a wooden crate near the rack with the document box in her lap, reading Lorraine's letter a second time in the thin beam of the phone's flashlight. Her expression was the one she gets when she has been handed back something she thought was already gone. "We're safe," I said, "but please hurry. It's cold down here." Police arrived in 13 minutes. I counted every second on the phone screen. Old habit. I spent 30 years measuring load tolerances and stress points down to the fraction, and when you do that long enough, counting becomes the way you stay calm. I heard the knock at the front door, heard Philip's voice, still composed, still controlled, the voice of a man who had prepared an answer for this too. Heard the officer ask to come inside, a pause, then footsteps crossing the kitchen floor directly above us. Then the bolt sliding back. The cellar door opened and light came floating down the stairs. A young officer stood at the top with a flashlight, looking down at the two of us. His expression went through a few changes in the space of about 3 seconds. Professional assessment, then confusion, then something harder when he took in the full picture. Miriam on the crate, the document box, the cold, the bolt on the outside of the door. "Sir, are you Howard Greer?" I said I was. "Can you come upstairs, please?" "Ma'am, paramedics are just outside." Miriam had not signed anything. Naomi had placed the power of attorney on the kitchen table in front of her after Philip locked the cellar door, told her it was paperwork related to updating her medical insurance. Miriam had looked at it, had held the pen. But something had stopped her. She told the officer later that it didn't feel right, that Howard would want to look at it first, that she was going to wait. Her short-term memory was soft, but her instincts were not. She set the pen down and sat there at that black walnut table until the police knocked on the door. "That's my wife. That has always been my wife. Philip was arrested that night, unlawful restraint and attempted real estate fraud. The camera footage made the case clean and simple, his own face, his own voice, on a device I installed in a room I built, saying exactly what he intended to do and when. His attorney was going to have a difficult time explaining that away. Naomi was taken in for questioning and released. She was named in the civil complaint. Lorraine filed Monday morning, well before the notary arrived. The injunction was granted the same day. The deed transfer, which Philip had prepared in advance with a forged version of my signature as the authorizing party, was voided. The irrevocable trust held exactly the way Lorraine had built it to hold, exactly the way I had needed it to hold. I sat in my kitchen that first night after everyone had gone with a cup of coffee I kept forgetting to drink. The house was quiet, just the sound of the heat moving through the vents and the windows settling against the cold outside. On the mantel in the front room there is a photograph of Naomi at 8 years old. She is standing on a step stool at this same kitchen counter, helping Miriam roll out pie crust at Thanksgiving, flour on her nose and both cheeks, laughing at something someone said that I can no longer remember. She has no idea yet in that photograph what kind of man she will marry or what she will let herself become. I have not moved that photograph. I don't intend to. Whatever she is now, whatever Philip made of her or she made of herself, she is also that 8-year-old in my kitchen. I carry both of those things at the same time, and I expect I will for the rest of my life. Miriam spent 2 nights in the hospital. Blood pressure spike from the cold and the stress. Her cardiologist told me she was going to be fine. And on a Wednesday afternoon in late January, I had the fire going and soup on the stove when she came through the front door. She walked through the kitchen, down the hall, and stopped in the doorway of the sunroom. The late winter light was coming in low through the south-facing windows, the way it does that time of year, flat and gold across the wood floor. The kind of light that makes the room look like something out of a photograph you didn't know you were taking. She stood there for a moment without saying anything, looking out at 2.5 acres of bare Connecticut winter. "Still entirely ours. You knew this was coming," she said. I hoped I was wrong. "How long ago did you build that wall?" 1991. She was quiet for a long time after that. Then she said, You built this whole house, and inside it, you built us a way out. I brought her the soup, and we sat together in the light and didn't need to say much else. Some things don't need words after 35 years. That was one of them. People ask me why I didn't tell Miriam sooner. About the hidden panel, the camera, the trust restructure, whether it bothered her that I kept all of it from her. Here's what I told her, and here's what I'll tell anyone who asks. I'm an engineer. Engineers don't build structures and hope they hold. They build structures that do not fail. I prepared for the worst because I loved my wife enough to think 3 steps ahead. I kept it from her because I didn't want her spending whatever good years we had left waiting for a disaster that might never arrive. She had enough weight to carry with the recovery. She didn't need mine too. She thought about that for a while. Then she said she understood, but that going forward she wanted to know. I said there wouldn't be a next time. She said, I know, but still. So now she knows everything. Every document, every copy, every contingency. We went through it all together on a Sunday afternoon in March, spread out across the black walnut table in the kitchen, Lorraine's files, the deed, the trust documents, the updated will that now includes a formal and detailed exclusion of both Philip and Naomi from any inheritance, along with a donation to a local organization that helps older adults navigate financial exploitation and elder abuse. Lorraine told me she had never had a client respond to an attempted robbery by immediately funding a charity. I told her that was probably because most of her clients hadn't spent their careers building things designed to outlast whatever came at them. She laughed. She is a good attorney. More importantly, she picks up on the second ring. Most mornings I walk through the house before Miriam wakes up. Kitchen, hallway, sunroom, down to the cellar and back up. I check the door. I have since replaced the bolt with a model that locks from both sides. I check the rack, the stone panel, the document box. I check that everything is where it should be. Old habit, an engineer's habit, you trust nothing entirely. You verify with your own hands, it always holds. I go back upstairs and start the coffee and listen to the house settle around me, the small creaks and sighs of something old and solid and well-maintained, still standing after everything that tried to bring it down. They thought they could take this house. They forgot who built it. And everything I build to last. Real security isn't a locked door. It's everything you put in place before someone else decides to lock it. The quiet work, the long preparation, the trust you build before the threat arrives. They came for the house. What they didn't count on was the man who built it, because a man who builds something with his own hands doesn't just build walls. He builds what stands behind them.